Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Marianne with the BBC. We're here to discuss artificial intelligence, or rather AI, and it's how creatively it can be used to improve and enhance advertising. First of all, with me, I've got Sean MacDonald, Chief Digital Officer of the McCann Worldgroup, which is one of the most recognizable advertising agencies in the world, you must have heard of. And we've got Edith Yeung, General Partner at early stage tech venture capitalist, Race Capital. And finally, FX Pierrel, Group Chief Data Officer at JCDecaux, which is also a very well-known out of home advertising firm that is also globally well known. So first of all, guys, I think shall we first of all start off with what's brought you here to Web Summit today? Shall we start with you, Sean?
I think for me, when I think about AI and creativity, I've been thinking about it a lot, and I think so much of AI is focused on automation. But what I think is really interesting is when you think about it in terms of transformation and how it can impact society, how it could bring good to the world. And since so much of it is based on historical data and predicts forward from that, I think it really requires human intervention to create societal change and think about new data sets and new ways to apply the technology.
And Edith, what brings you here today to Web Summit?
At Race Capital, we're early stage investor focused on all things infrastructure, particularly data infrastructure. We've recently invested in a company called Social Chat and led their $6 million seed round. It's all about giving data back to the brand and make sure that they take control.
To the advertisers, you're saying as well?
That's right.
And is that taking that away from something else?
Right now, brands spend millions of dollars, of course, working with McCann, on Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok, but really you have no control of any of the data at all. The money you spend, you cannot actually tie it back to the actual order and sales. So this is something that we care a lot about, and we think that there's a lot of startup that can help solve that.
Okay. And FX Pierrel, what brings you to Web Summit today?
So to this session specifically, just to make sure, guys, JCDecaux is maybe one of the oldest company attending the Web Summit. We've been active for like 60 years, more or less. And believe it or not, we do AI. As old as we are, we do AI, we do some deep learning, and we are investing a lot on this to make sure advertisers, agency, are getting the most out of the display capacities we give them to make sure they really understand that displaying a brand on our network's assets in a city center, like in Lisbon, really need a bit of adjustment, making sure you can impact people positively with the brands.
Okay. So my first question for our panel is, so we're talking about creativity. I mean, already advertising is a very creative medium. So what can AI bring to it? Sean, did you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we've been doing some really interesting work, and the reason it interested me is because I feel like it comes from the heart. As many of you are probably aware, we have a lot of issues with guns in the US, and there was a horrible shooting in Florida where 17 children, young adults, were killed. And one of the projects that we did, McCann Health did, was actually bringing Joaquin Oliver back to life using AI. And so we really replicated him working in partnership with his parents and to give him voice today so that he could ask his cohort to vote and take action and really respond to the devastation that happened to him. And I think this is where the beauty of human storytelling really intersects with the automation. I mean, another example where I think AI is very powerful and can create a much more inclusive society is our German team did work with people with who are hard of hearing. And a challenge that many of us may not even consider is that they cannot interact with Alexa. So here's a huge piece of voice technology that's dominating the world today, and they're being excluded from it. And so our team did this amazing thing where they augmented Alexa with a little camera, and they trained the AI to recognize sign language. So people who are hard of hearing, when they're in their homes or smart homes, they could direct them using sign language. And if they wanted a response from Alexa, then it could be delivered to their mobile phone. So these to me are like a beautiful, I don't think an AI could create those solutions without humans, and I think they're truly transformative and beautiful.
Okay. So basically onto the creativity question. I think there was also something that we discussed before, Sean, that we were talking about wanting to improve inclusivity. Does that play into AI and creativity in any way?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, for us, it's our #1 priority from our CEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion. From our CEO is diversity, equity, and inclusion. From our AI CEO, no. And we've actually integrated it into our strategic process. So normally you would do like a 5Cs analysis of company, culture, connections, et cetera. But we've added the 6C, which is about conscious inclusion. And so with any brief that we get from a client, we are considering the groups that historically have been marginalized or haven't had voice. And so, for example, I'm working on a pain brand right now, and one thing that we discovered in our research is that Black people are often assumed falsely to have a higher tolerance to pain. And this affects women primarily, this affects athletes. And so by having that insight, we're able to interrogate the data and actually think through how we can ask the proper questions so that the predictive models we'll be using in our advertising can actually address this social inequity.
So speaking of social inequity, I think that's something that you're looking into as well, Edith, the idea that we give so much power to the social media giants. And you're talking about the fact that you invested in a firm that's trying to sort of change that. What do you think are the problems that need to be solved?
I think the #1 problem for many, many other brands, you spend millions of dollars to buying advertising on Facebook, Instagram, or TikTok. But at the end of the day, you really don't know the dollar that you spend, how's it correlated to actual revenue. So especially when Google get rid of cookies, a lot of brands is going to go crazy because you really don't know like how you're actually going to take control. So like the key thing that we wanted to help solve is I think there's a lot of opportunity for startup to think about to give data ownership, customer data ownership back to the platform, to drive a lot of the actual live streaming activities. Social commerce is going to be trillions of dollars by 2028. I think I saw like 3.8 trillion. And there's a lot of opportunities to make sure that a lot of these live streaming or social commerce is also happening on your own website so that you have your full control of data back to the brands.
And is that particularly important when social media giants do things that we don't necessarily agree with in society?
I think what's going on with Facebook worldwide, and in fact we have the whistleblower here yesterday, is super interesting. There's going to be a lot of changes. And by the way, they don't even call themselves Facebook anymore. So in that sense, I think it will be really interesting if a lot of the advertisers will have even less data than they do today. Facebook don't even share email address today to actually share with the brands. So that will be going further. One slight change of the algo will drive how you actually run marketing in social media. So that's why it's so important for our companies, our startup that we invested in, especially using AI and data. For example, we invested in this company called Alder.ai, do live transcription and live search to actually be able to prompt whoever is speaking to predict what you're about to say. So we've been seeing startup literally, if you're doing live streaming, you can actually sort of see the prompter to advise you to say something else, because based on the data, you can actually tell that if you say this instead of that, the viewer actually will likely to buy more and increase the shopping cart and the value. It's super fascinating.
Okay, so that's very interesting. So that's basically about what we're doing in terms of having the ads. But let's step out of the digital world into the outside world. I think it's very clear. It isn't just a matter of making an advert and just slapping it onto a bus shelter or a billboard anymore. FX, did you want to tell us more about that?
It used to be the case. Like we are at the end of the supply chain. So creative agencies are having great concept, and they care a lot, and they think a lot about how they are going to display the brand on Instagram and on Snap, etc. And they put a lot of attention, and often they forget about us. but we are offering like 2 square meters, even bigger sizes in the streets to impact people. And our job with AI is to make sure that now advertisers, creatives, brands have access to technology that will help them understanding that the display we offer them is actually on the largest social network in the world. We are the only media operating in China and all over the world. Facebook doesn't, Google doesn't, and we have this capacity. And I think AI for us is just a way to capture, attract attention, say, guys, what you're doing online, you can do it with us now. You can test your creatives, you can understand how people are going to engage visually, how they are going to engage their first look on the ad, and how you should think about it before just like printing stuff and putting on the walls. And I think that's our job on data as part of the transformation, to make sure we have a share at this table, making sure the greatest creative ideas have the same share of voice, whatever is the medium.
So can you give me an example? So does your AI, is it able to inform advertisers about a certain time it's better to advertise on, or a certain way of advertising? What does the data do?
Well, actually, if you look at the way you engage, I mean, next time you are downtown Lisbon, look at a 2 square meter ad. You're walking by, you have your thoughts in your mind, you maybe have your phone. We need to catch your attention in a second. So if you put too many elements on the ad, we'll not do it. If the brand is too big, if your icon is too big, so it's really helping them understanding that if you overload or if you don't display the right colors or the right sequence, you might lose the attention and not get the objective you were looking for. So the AI is just like very easy. We don't have to send rocket to the moon. It's just like take your ad, put it into our tool, and it will tell you, okay, this is the sequence people will engage on the ad. And sometimes, to give you an example, we used to work for a wine brand, and they were doing a fantastic setup, great table, 10 people, and the bottles, etc. And it was so crowded on the ad that you couldn't see the product anymore. So the look was totally lost, and we just told them, guys, data doesn't lie. Look at the results, it's average. You should rethink. They did it, and they had a great campaign with us.
So it's basically the data, it gives you data analytics, interesting data analytics that's custom to that ad.
Yes, we are getting away, especially with our media, there is a lot of subjectivity. A good ad for me is maybe not a good ad for you. And you need to really minimize the impact of subjectivity. And I think AI and data for us is a fantastic lever to say to people, we have fact. You can like it or not, but we have fact to help you improving the way you design your ads to go on the 2 square meter or 8 square meters in an airport.
Okay, so we've heard a lot of really good things about AI, and definitely at a tech conference, you're going to hear so much about artificial intelligence. But obviously, as Sean alluded to earlier, there is a dark side to AI. There's been a problem I've been writing about for more than 6 years in really trying to understand how do we deal with bias in data if historically people, a certain type of marginalized group lived in a certain area, and you took data, historical city data from that area, and then you use that in your campaign, you would, despite the advertiser not deliberately trying to be racist or trying to marginalize anybody, by the fact the mere data in itself is historically discriminative, it creates a problem that goes on with us into the future. So I think, what would you guys say are some ways that we can combat that problem? Maybe shall we start with you, Sean?
Yeah, I mean, I've really, my team is a futures team, and we do a lot of work in terms of futurism. And one thing I've been very interested in and been studying a lot about is Afrofuturism, queer futurism, indigenous futurism, and the power of giving voice to people who historically haven't had a voice, haven't had data captured from them, haven't had their stories told, and actually partnering to understand what is the future that they imagine. What would AI look like in the future that they want to exist into? And I think it's our obligation as people are really trusting brands more than governments these days. I think it's our obligation as representatives of brands to do outreach into these communities and actually assist them in capturing new types of data, interrogating what types of questions we're asking, even in surveys, so that we can start to create and manifest AI functionality that will actually benefit them.
How about you? What would you say?
Marianne, you just mentioned, remind me of the Google search mobile apps. When I take a photo of or anything, they will suggest similar image. Every time I took a photo of myself, it keeps suggesting I'm like a Japanese painting. And I'm not Japanese, okay? I'm Chinese. so which means that in some sense, there's not enough of a data, or even the data they have is just not in. It's definitely tons of bias. I'm not Japanese painting. So in some sense, which remind me of another company we invested in called Opaque Systems. So Opaque is actually started by the co-founder of Databricks, is encrypted data analytics, which means that we can do analytics on data you cannot see. So as we are flood, machine learning, you need a lot of data for it, but we are biased. We're going to feed data that we have access to. We actually need as much data as possible, but really we need to protect the data, encrypt them. And we can only do these sort of advanced AI and be able to protect it at the same time if you can do encrypted data analytics. So I'm super excited this particular technology, but it still takes time to improve.
So you're saying that this is going to be technology that's going to protect the integrity of existing data so it can't be tampered with. Is that
That's
what
correct.
you're saying?
That's
is
right.
that actually a problem nowadays? That it's
I think right now there's a push and pull. There are data actually you do need from, let's say, for example, for banking fraud. You do need all the banks to contribute to the data set, but no one wants to let the competitors see what they got. So to solve that sort of problem, you really need to take as much data as possible, but at the same time make sure that you protect it by encrypting the data. Doesn't matter if it's image or voice or contextual, then you can actually be more accurate to eliminate the bias.
okay, so that would be good for doing things like protecting things like when Google had its problems with the NHS, with NHS data that was being sent to it just before the pandemic then. I mean, do you think it would help with situations like the Cambridge Analytica incident with Facebook, whereby they were using data that Facebook didn't intend to give them through an API?
Unfortunately, for now, I don't work with Facebook. I think sometimes the priority of monetization directly conflict with how you actually treat the data. So if there is nothing to share with the advertiser, then it's going to directly impact how Facebook make money. So unfortunately, I don't know yet, but hopefully towards the right direction.
So FX, what do you think?
Well, if I look at only out-of-home point of view and then where we stand, we started after everybody, which means that we learned from others' mistake, and we didn't have any legacy to dismantle or to rebuild. So we strictly follow, and I'm really meaning it, like the regulation that people are giving us, CCPA, GDPR, everything that is like now framing the world. And for us, that's really a guidance. Starting from nothing, you look at the rule, you have lines, and you don't pass the line. And the second is that in our media, we do not collect data. We are not a social network, and we don't have the temptation to just like store for the sake of storage. Like I have multiple data and I keep storing it. We are more in a less is more strategy. We only use what we need to cook and what we have to do. And it's a more reasonable approach and very pragmatic approach. And also our media is a mass media. We are not following any one-to-one personalization. This is not our trajectory. We are a mass media. What we want is to impact people when they are coming in specific location for specific point of interest. And that's what we care about. This means that we are more into the context more than the personalization. We care about why people are coming to an area, how many they are. We don't really care about their nationality, their origin, destination. We don't care about this. So there is kind of a native protection in the way we operate data. And I believe this is the best way for us to keep proceeding and answering to the needs of our customers, internal and external.
Is there anything, though, that JCDecaux does to sort of combat bias in data, for example, in existing data about areas and certain people who live in that area?
Well, we are coming to a level of granularity of data where we don't come at this level. We don't go at this level. And actually, we don't need it. And secondly, we don't want to get there. Because it's a very slippery area where you can pass lines very fast and you can keep like storing and populating data you will never use. So we have many cases where we just said, okay, we don't need it, let's delete. And I think this is the best protection for us, to remain very pragmatic in what we do and just trying to answer the question we have to, and not trying to do like rocket science or the crazy scientist.
makes sense. So how can we try to help the public trust AI? Because obviously there have been issues with trust with the public, with AI, with internet services. Obviously that's becoming a huge problem now. What can we do to help the public trust? Obviously AI is basically only getting smarter, it's only getting more interesting in the different use cases. Do we need to try to explain more about what's going on to the consumers? Any open question for anybody?
I go on this one to start. Just transparency and demystifying. There are a lot of good movies about AI and robots and flying stuff. I think AI starts with your calculator. It's just like basic AI, and you don't need to go too far to do well your job. And it goes back to one of the comments regarding ethics. I think the next big thing on AI, whatever is your industry or your vertical, would be how do you put ethic into your debate before developing something and before going too far. If you lose control of what you develop, which can happen on many stories we hear lately, that becomes a trouble.
Yeah, I feel like ethics is a big theme. I think, Edith, you just keep bringing it up as a theme. And I think in terms of brands, they really have to work to elevate their purpose and what they're going to bring to the world. And I think you raise an interesting point. Without control of that data, how can they function ethically in the world that we're living in? So I think as we move into this cookieless future, it's going to become more important. We talked about this before, that clients and brands are able to own that data. And then I think that by expanding the nature of that data to be much more inclusive, then they can start to build trust by delivering services and experiences that really serve everybody.
Great. And what do you think, Edith?
I think the key thing is really is a balancing act between, and the other day, like with Apple changing sort of the way that now every single one of us, the app developer actually need to tell us, hey, this is like push notification. It really changed a lot of. It makes Snapchat lost a lot of revenue in some sense. And so for us, it's a balancing where the user also need a lot of education. And if you ask my mother, you really need to take control of like what you're watching and incognito mode. She had no idea she's watching fake news because YouTube keeps serving on things that she wanted to watch. So in some sense, it's education for the user to understand what this platform is using it for. And then also in the startup world, there's a big push of we need to basically own our own data, where instead of we are trying to opt ourselves out, every single action we opt ourselves in. But of course, this is a reverse and really take a lot of responsibility from a user point of view. I don't think we're there yet. But it's a balancing act between getting ourselves educated and then also push the platform to make sure that they're as transparent as possible. And François was saying.
So we've just got time for one last question. So since obviously we've got the Facebook whistleblower. We know that it is a really big, important problem. We need to sort of push back on the social media giants, on the tech giants. We need to almost sort of have a say back. Is there something that the advertising industry can do to sort of push back and reflect society's concerns? In particular, earlier this year and last year, Unilever have been saying a lot more that the largest consumer goods provider, maker in the world, they've been sort of putting down more firm boundaries with these huge internet giants. Do you think that there's a place and there's more that we could be doing? Maybe, Sean.
The largest advertisers hold a lot of sway with Facebook. They sit on a client council with them, and when they speak, Facebook moves. When it came to brand safety, like my inbox just got inundated with messages from Facebook about all the corrective action they're taking. So, the power is where the money is. That said, Facebook does a lot from small and medium businesses, and that's a much more disenfranchised population that doesn't have like collective power with Facebook. So I don't know, maybe there's something interesting there. If they could create a coalition, then I think you would see a lot of change.
As two businesses that are not quite, sort of sideways in the advertising thing, do you feel that there is a power that on the advertising side, advertisers and the industry itself can say to sort of reflect societal concerns?
I want to chime in real quick. It's just like before you officially divorce or break up with Facebook and Instagram, there's need to be a transition. What that means is it's up to the advertiser and the brand to really take back their ownership of data back in our own hands. If you can do that, then even Facebook change all kind of algo. You have direct relationship with your audience through email, through content, and direct display ad. There's just so much more you can do if you have control of the data.
Okay, cool. And sorry, last remark from you, FX.
Well, I agree with what had been said. I mean, advertisers have power in their hands, and I think with what's happening with the limitation on iOS or what's happening on the cookie world, it's giving them back more power to rethink the way they advertise, the way they engage on the platforms, and making sure they get most out of what they spend, using smoothly all the medias which are on the table for them.
Brilliant. All right, I think that's all we have time for. Thank you very much to FX, Edith, and Sean.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Marianne.